The healer of Kisiwa. In the heart of the vast savanna lands of Kisiwa, where the golden grass swayed under the whisper of the evening breeze, there stood a village unlike any other. Kisiwa was small, yet rich in spirit, home to farmers, traders, hunters, and mothers who sang lullabies under the moonlight. But of all the people in Kisiwa, none was more beloved than Dr. Jaha. Jaha was not just a doctor. He was a miracle worker. His hands, calloused from years of healing, were known for bringing life where there was once despair. When sickness struck, it was Jaha who stood firm. When pregnant women cried out in pain, it was Jaha's steady hands that delivered their babies safely into the world. And yet, there was something peculiar about him. The villagers spoke in hushed tones about how Jaha never married, never had children of his own, and never seemed to age. His eyes, deep like the river pools after the rainy season, held secrets that no one dared to ask about. But what did it matter? He was a gift from the ancestors, the villagers said. And so, life in Kisiwa continued in its peaceful rhythm, with Jaha as the guardian of birth and life. The warning in the wind. One night, as the village settled into slumber, Jaha lay awake in his hut, staring at the flickering flames of his oil lamp. Something was not right. A chill ran down his spine, though the night was warm. Then, the wind changed. It was subtle at first, like a whisper between the trees, but then it grew, a voice carried on the air, a voice that Jaha knew all too well. Jaha, do you think we have forgotten? Jaha's breath caught in his throat. He closed his eyes tightly, hoping it was just exhaustion playing tricks on him. But the voice did not stop. Your time is almost up, healer of Kisiwa. The oil lamp flickered violently, casting strange shadows against the walls. Jaha clenched his fist, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew what this meant. The spirits were calling their death. For years, he had ignored the distant echoes of his past, telling himself that if he saved enough lives, perhaps the spirits would forget. But they never forgot. They never forgave. A price must always be paid. Jaha sat up, his breathing ragged. A sudden knock at his door jolted him back to reality. Dr. Jaha, a voice called. There is a woman in labor. Jaha pushed his fears aside. Whatever fate awaited him, his duty came first. He grabbed his medicine bag and stepped into the night, leaving behind the whispering wind and the unseen eyes that watched him from the shadows. A birth like no other. The woman in labor was Naima, the wife of a fisherman. She lay in the small bathing hut, sweat glistening on her dark skin, her breath labored, her cries sharp like a blade against the silence of the village. Jaha walked swiftly, his hands steady despite the storm raging in his mind. You are strong, Naima, he murmured, pressing a damp cloth against her forehead. Breathe. It will be over soon. The midwives assisted him, their experienced hands moving in rhythm with his commands. And then, a sharp cry pierced the night. A healthy baby boy was born, his tiny fingers curled as he wailed his first breath into the world. The room erupted in joy, the midwives clapping, Naima laughing through tears. Jaha, too, smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. His gaze flickered to the placenta, lying on the cloth beside the newborn. His heartbeat quickened. The spirits were watching. They were waiting. A shadow from the past. As he wrapped the placenta carefully in cloth, preparing for the traditional burial, the door to the hut creaked open. A tall, cloaked figure stepped inside. The celebration died down as all eyes turned to the stranger. His presence felt unnatural, as if he had walked from a world different from theirs. Forgive my intrusion, the man said smoothly. I am but a traveler seeking the great healer of Kisiwa. Jaha's fingers tightened around the cloth bundle. His voice was calm when he spoke, but inside, his stomach churned. I am Jaha, he said. Who are you? The man smiled, but it was the kind of smile that carried danger beneath its charm. I am Malik Ibn Badu, a merchant of rare things. And I have come for something that only you can provide. Jaha's pulse thundered in his ears. He knew. Somehow, this man knew. The merchant's offer. That night, after ensuring Naima and her newborn were safe, Jaha followed Malik to the outskirts of the village. The two men stood beneath a giant baobab tree, its ancient roots twisting like the fingers of a sleeping giant. Malik turned to face Jaha, his expression unreadable. You have a gift, he said. But you also have a debt. I know of the spirits you serve, doctor. And I know that their hunger will never end. Jaha clenched his jaw. I do not know what you are talking about. Malik chuckled softly. Oh, but you do. He stepped closer, his voice a whisper. I have buyers in faraway lands who will pay handsomely for what you have, the afterbirth of the newborns. Jaha's hands curled into fists. You speak of forbidden things. Malik tilted his head. Do I? Or do I speak of a solution to your problem? Jaha remained silent. I can pay you enough to escape your debt, Malik continued. Enough to free you from the spirit's hold. You can stop fearing the whispers in the wind. You can live a normal life. The words coiled around Jaha like a snake. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of his burden press down on him, suffocating. Could it really be this simple? Sell what was already taken and be rid of his past. But deep inside, he knew nothing with spirits was ever simple. Malik smiled knowingly. You don't have to decide now. But be warned, Jaha, the spirits will not wait much longer. And when they come for you, they will not ask for gold. They will ask for something far worse. With that, Malik disappeared into the night, leaving Jaha standing beneath the ancient tree, his heart pounding with a decision that could change the fate of Kisiwa forever. The merchant's demand. The night was thick with silence as Dr. Jaha sat outside his hut, the weight of Malik Ibn Badu's words pressing down on him like the branches of an ancient baobab tree. Enough to free you from the spirit's hold. The merchant's offer slithered through Jaha's mind, poisoning his thoughts. He had spent years ignoring the whispers in the wind, pretending that the spirits would forget the pact he had made long ago. But the spirits never forgot. And now, someone else knew. Someone who should not know. His fingers tightened around his wooden staff as he stared out at the village, where the glow of small fires flickered outside the huts, the soft murmur of laughter and storytelling carried on the wind. This was his home. These were his people. How could he betray them? But what choice did he have? The wind picked up again, calling through the trees like a serpent, and with it, a voice. Jaha, your time is running out. Jaha shut his eyes and took a deep breath. Tomorrow, he would make his choice. The shadow of the spirits. The morning sun was a lazy thing, stretching across the village of Kisiwa, painting the sky in shades of gold and deep crimson. Jaha woke to the sound of chickens clucking, women pounding millet, and the playful shouts of children chasing each other through the dust. For a moment, he almost felt normal. Then, his eyes landed on a small clay bowl sitting just outside his hut. It hadn't been there the night before. A cold dread curled in his stomach as he stepped closer. Inside the bowl was a single black feather, resting atop a pile of white ashes. The meaning was clear. The spirits had sent their warning. Jaha swallowed hard, pushing down the rising panic in his chest. He was running out of time. And then, another knock at his door. Malik. Jaha opened it to find the merchant standing there, dressed in his fine robes, his expression as calm as the still waters of the river before a storm. Good morning, Hila, Malik said smoothly, stepping into the hut uninvited. I trust you slept well. Jaha said nothing, watching as the man glanced around his modest home, the wooden shelves lined with jars of herbs, the low stool where Jaha mixed his medicines, the woven mat where he had spent too many sleepless nights. Malik's gaze landed on the clay bowl of ashes by the doorway. He smirked. "Oh. I see they have sent their message." Jaha's jaw tightened. "You know more than you should." Malik laughed, settling himself onto a stool. "I make it my business to know things, Doctor. And I know that you are a man with a terrible burden." Jaha crossed his arms. "If you know so much, then you know why I cannot help you." Malik raised an eyebrow. "Cannot? Or will not?" Jaha remained silent. The merchant leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. His voice dropped to a whisper. "You have something valuable, Doctor. Something rare. I have buyers in the great cities beyond the desert who would pay a king's fortune for it." Jaha's fingers twitched, but he said nothing. Malik's voice softened, almost gentle. "Think of what you could do with such wealth," he urged. "You could build a real hospital, with medicines from the West. You could travel to the great city and study under the most skilled healers. You could free yourself from this prison of whispers and shadows." Jaha's throat was dry. The weight of those words was heavy. A hospital. A real one. A chance to escape his fate. But at what cost? Malik sat back, watching him. "You don't have to decide today. But you will decide, Jaha. Because the spirits will not wait much longer." And with that, he rose and left, leaving behind only the scent of foreign oils and a choice too heavy to bear. The midwives began to suspect. Jaha did not notice Auntie Molly watching from across the village. The old midwife had seen many things in her time: babies born under blood moons, women who claimed to have seen spirits in the trees, men who sold their souls for power. And she had seen this before: a man caught in something greater than himself. For years, she had ignored the small signs. The way Jaha never let the mothers see their placentas. The way he always wrapped them in cloth himself, quickly and carefully. The way he refused to let anyone else handle them. But now, she had seen something more. She had seen Malik ibn Badu leaving Jaha's hut. And she had seen the fear in Jaha's eyes. Auntie Molly had delivered children in this village for more years than she could count. She knew secrets fester like wounds when left unattended. And she would not allow a sickness to spread in her village. The birth that changed everything. 3 nights later, a woman named Naya, a young widow, went into labor. It was a long and difficult birth, but at last, with Jaha's skilled hands, she gave birth to a healthy baby girl. The mother wept with joy, holding her newborn to her chest. The midwives bustled about, cleaning and wrapping the baby. Jaha, meanwhile, reached for the placenta. His fingers trembled. He could hear the spirits whispering. "Time is running out." He moved to wrap it in cloth, but this time, Naya stopped him. "Wait, doctor," she said, her voice weak but firm. "I want to see it." Jaha froze. The midwife stopped moving. Auntie Molly's gaze sharpened. Jaha forced a smile. "There's no need, Naya. You should rest." But the woman was determined. "It is my child's birthright," she insisted. "In my family, we bury it beneath the old baobab tree, so our children will always have strong roots." Jaha's pulse pounded in his ears. If he gave it to her, the spirits would take their revenge. If he refused, the midwives would know something was wrong. Auntie Molly stepped closer, her wrinkled hands resting on her hips. "Doctor," she said, her voice slow and deliberate. "Give the mother her placenta." Jaha's mouth went dry. He could feel the weight of every pair of eyes in the room. This was it. He had only one choice left. He reached down, pretending to wrap the placenta, but instead, he switched it for a bundle of cloth. Here, he said, forcing a smile as he handed the bundle to Naya. Bury it well, my sister. Naya, exhausted and overjoyed, took it without checking. Jaha let out a slow breath. But as he looked up, he met Auntie Molly's eyes. She was watching him. Closely. Too closely. And Jaha knew his time was running out. The birth that changed everything. The whisper of lies. Dr. Jaha had spent years perfecting the art of deception. With careful hands and steady words, he had convinced the mothers of Kisiwa that their newborn's placenta was nothing more than flesh to be buried. But tonight, something had changed. As he handed the fake bundle to Naya, forcing a smile, he could feel it, the weight of suspicion pressing against him. Not from the mother. Not from the other midwives. But from Auntie Molly. Her eyes, dark and sharp as a falcon's, followed his hands with an intensity that made his stomach twist. She said nothing, but he knew. She knew. Jaha swallowed the tight knot of fear in his throat and turned away before his hands could start to shake. But as he did, the wind picked up outside the bathing hut, cold and whispering. Your time is running out, Jaha. The voice sent a chill down his spine. For the first time in years, he felt it, the spirit growing restless. Something was coming. And it would not be kind. A mother's doubt. The next morning, the village of Kisiwa woke to celebration. Naya's newborn daughter had survived the night, and the people rejoiced. Drums pounded in rhythmic joy, women sang songs of blessings, and men raised their hands to the sky in gratitude. But in the midst of the festivities, Auntie Molly was watching. She had seen too many births to ignore what she had witnessed the night before. The way Jaha had moved too quickly. The way his fingers had clutched the placenta like a man gripping a secret. And so, while the village feasted, she did something no midwife had ever done before. She found Naya. The young mother sat outside her hut, cradling her newborn, humming softly as the baby suckled at her breast. Auntie Molly approached with a slow, deliberate step. Daughter, she greeted. The gods have blessed you with a strong child. Naya smiled. Yes, Mama Mboli. I am forever grateful. Mboli knelt beside her, voice careful. Did you bury the placenta as your family's tradition demands? Naya's brow furrowed slightly. No, not yet. My brother was to do it today, by the old baobab tree. Mboli's heart pounded. May I see it? Naya blinked in surprise. See it. Mboli forced a gentle smile. Just an old woman's curiosity. I have helped deliver many children, but I have never seen a placenta prepared the way Jaha did last night. Naya hesitated. I suppose that is fine. She reached for the bundle Jaha had given her the night before, still wrapped in cloth, untouched. Carefully, she unraveled it. What fell into her hands was not flesh. Not a placenta. But a bundle of cloth and ashes. Naya gasped, nearly dropping it. What? What is this? Auntie Molly's lips pressed into a thin line. Her worst suspicions had been confirmed. Dr. Jaha had been lying. And now, she needed to know why. The midwives gather. By the time the sun began to dip beyond the horizon, the midwives of Kisiwa had gathered beneath the great baobab tree. There were only 5 of them, but they were the pillars of the village, the keepers of life, birth, and tradition. Auntie Molly stood before them, her back straight despite her old age. Sisters, she said, voice steady. Something is wrong with Dr. Jaha. The others whispered amongst themselves. Jaha, one of them, Auntie Sefiu, frowned. What do you mean? Mboli held up the fake bundle. This, she said. This is what he gave to Naya, telling her it was a child's placenta. Gasps rippled through the group. Auntie Tosin, the youngest among them, stared in horror. But why would he do such a thing? Auntie Mboli exhaled slowly. That, my sisters, is the question we must answer. For a moment, there was silence. Then Auntie Sephew, the most blunt of them, muttered darkly, "There is only one reason a man hides something tied to birth." Auntie Tosin swallowed. What reason? Mboli's gaze hardened. Witchcraft. The word hung heavy in the air. A deep, terrible hush fell over the midwives. The thought was too monstrous to believe. Jaha was a healer, a protector, a man who had saved more lives than they could count. But he was also a man who never let anyone touch the placentas. A man who had grown too wealthy for a village doctor. A man who had been seen whispering in the dark with a foreign merchant. Auntie Molly lifted her chin. "We must confront him," she said. "But we must do it wisely." The other midwives nodded. And as the moon began to rise, the women of Kisiwa prepared to uncover the truth. The spirits grew impatient. That night, as Jaha sat alone in his hut, he felt it. A presence. The shadows in the corners of the room stretched unnaturally. The air grew thick, suffocating. And then, they came. The whispering voices. Jaha. His breath caught in his throat. "You have failed us." A chill raced down his spine. "No," he whispered. "I have not failed. I will deliver more. I will." The shadows shifted, moved. "We are hungry, Jaha. You cannot deceive us forever." His heartbeat thundered. "The woman knows. The midwives are watching. You will not last much longer." Jaha squeezed his eyes shut. He had to do something. Fast. Then, like a blade slicing through the night, a knock at his door. His stomach dropped. The midwives had come. Judgment begins. The knock at the door. The knock came again, firm and deliberate. Dr. Jaha stood frozen, his fingers digging into the wooden table before him. His heart, once a sanctuary, now felt like a prison, its walls closing in with the weight of his sins. Outside, the wind stirred, whispering like unseen spirits watching from the trees. "They know, Jaha." His throat tightened. Another knock. More insistent this time. He forced his feet to move, swallowing down the bile rising in his throat. When he pulled open the door, his heart clenched. They were all there. The 5 midwives of Kisiwa. Their faces were etched with suspicion, their eyes sharp as the blades of harvest sickles. At their center stood Auntie Molly. Her wrinkled hands were clasped behind her back, her spine straight despite her years. She was not here to talk. She was here for the truth. "Jaha," she said. Her voice was steady, but there was still beneath it. "We need to speak." He hesitated. A fraction of a second too long. Auntie Sephew, the blunt one, narrowed her eyes. "What's wrong, doctor? You look as if you've seen a ghost." Jaha exhaled slowly and stepped aside. "Come in." One by one, the midwives entered his hut, filling the small space with their presence. Jaha's pulse pounded like a war drum. Outside, the wind howled. And far beyond the village, deep in the wilderness, something else stirred. The midwives confront Jaha. Auntie Molly wasted no time. She walked to the center of the hut and placed the fake placenta bundle onto Jaha's table. The room went silent. Jaha's breath hitched. Auntie Tosin, the youngest, crossed her arms. "Would you like to explain this, doctor?" Jaha felt trapped. His mind raced. If he lied, they would not believe him. If he told the truth, he would be ruined. He took a slow breath, choosing his words carefully. I wanted to spare the mother. Sometimes, I prepared the bundle so she does not have to see the placenta in its raw state. Auntie Sephew scoffed. Lies. Women have buried placentas for centuries. You think we cannot handle the sight of them? The others murmured in agreement. Auntie Molly tilted her head, watching him. Studying him. Jaha, she said. Where is the real placenta? The question pierced through him like a spear. His mouth felt dry. I disposed of it properly. Bolly's eyes darkened. Where? Jaha's hands clenched. The room felt smaller, tighter. Jaha, Bolly said, stepping closer, her voice almost a whisper. Do not make me ask again. Jaha licked his lips. He could feel the walls of his lies crumbling. And just as he was about to speak, a scream tore through the village. The spirits grew impatient. The midwives whirled toward the door. Another scream pierced the night. This time, it was not human. A horrible wailing, high and unnatural, echoed through the trees. The sound of something old, something hungry. Jaha's blood turned to ice. The spirits had come. Auntie Molly turned to him sharply. What have you done? Before he could answer, another cry erupted, this time from the old baobab tree at the edge of the village. People were running, shouting, their voices tangled in panic. Jaha felt his legs move before his mind could catch up. The midwives followed, their feet pounding against the dirt, hearts racing. As they reached the baobab tree, they stopped short. And what they saw stole the breath from their lungs. The blood at the baobab. The earth was split open. A hole, deep and unnatural, gaped at the base of the baobab tree. And inside it, something moved. Jaha's stomach twisted. No, this wasn't possible. The hole should have been empty. But it wasn't. The placentas were there. Dozens of them. Rotting, seething, pulsing as if still alive. The women gasped in horror. Then, a voice rose from the pit. A voice that did not belong to the living. Jaha, you betrayed us. The wind howled violently, whipping dust into the air. Jaha stumbled back, eyes wide with terror. Auntie Molly turned to him, her face cold. You have been feeding them, she said. Not a question. A statement. Jaha's breath hitched. Auntie Sephew took a step forward, voice trembling with rage. You have been giving the spirits the placentas, haven't you? Jaha opened his mouth, but no words came. The wind screamed. The pit shuddered. And then, a figure rose from the hole. It was tall, cloaked in shadow. Its eyes burned with an eerie, golden light. Jaha fell to his knees. He knew this spirit. It was the one he had made his bargain with. And now, it had come to collect. The bargain revealed. Auntie Molly did not flinch as the spirit hovered above the pit, its form flickering like fire. She knew what it was. A creature older than the village itself. A being that only accepted two kinds of offerings, life or blood. You, it hissed, looking down at Jaha. You broke our pact. Jaha's lips trembled. No, I gave you what you wanted. The spirit's voice turned into a growl. You were warned. The debt is not paid. Auntie Tosin, though terrified, found her voice. What does it want, Jaha? She demanded. The doctor hung his head. And finally, he spoke. My life, he whispered. Gasps rippled through the midwives. Jaha closed his eyes, shame clawing at him. I made a bargain, he admitted. Long ago. I was dying as a child. The spirit saved me, but only if I agreed to return the gift of birth to them. Auntie Molly's face darkened. You mean the placentas? Jaha nodded. For years, I honored my debt, he said. But I I grew tired. I thought I could stop. I thought I could deceive them. His eyes flickered toward the spirit. But they do not forget. The wind howled again. The spirit turned its burning gaze to the midwives. You have 3 choices. Silence. 1. Jaha surrenders himself, and the debt is paid. The midwife stiffened. 2. The village must replace the offerings he failed to give. Their blood ran cold. Auntie Mboli narrowed her eyes. And the 3rd. The spirit smiled. 3. You break the curse. But it will cost more than you are willing to pay. Jaha looked up sharply. The midwives exchanged glances. Auntie Mboli stepped forward. Tell us, she said. What is the price? The price of the curse. The wind howled like a wounded beast, tearing through the trees with unnatural force. The spirit loomed over the pit of rotting, pulsing placentas, its golden eyes burning like twin suns. It was no longer waiting. The village of Kisiwa had come to a moment of reckoning. And Dr. Jaha was at the center of it all. The midwives stood unmoving, their breath shallow, their hands curled into fists. None of them had ever encountered something like this before, a spirit that did not whisper from the trees or hide in the shadows, but stood before them, demanding payment. 3 choices. The voice of the spirit cut through the air like a knife. 1. Jaha surrenders himself, and the debt is paid. The midwives shifted, their eyes flickering to the doctor, who knelt trembling at the edge of the pit. 2. The village must replace the offerings he failed to give. Auntie Sefiu hissed through her teeth. You mean the unborn children? The spirit did not answer. It did not need to. A wave of horror passed through them all. 3. Break the curse. But the cost will be greater than you are willing to pay. A deep silence settled over them, heavier than stone. Auntie Mboli's voice was steady, but sharp as a blade. Tell us the price. The spirit's head tilted slightly, watching her, as if amused. You wish to break the curse? Auntie Mboli did not blink. Yes. The wind screamed. The trees shuddered. And then the spirit smiled. It was not a human smile. It was the stretching of something ancient, something without flesh, something that knew time was its greatest weapon. To break the curse, it said slowly, one life must be given. A cold dread filled the air. Auntie Tosin staggered back. A life. The spirit's burning gaze flickered to Dr. Jaha. Not his. Jaha's breath hitched. What? The spirit lifted one hand, its fingers long and gnarled like the roots of an ancient tree. It pointed past the midwives. Past Jaha. To the village behind them. The one who must die. The wind held its breath. Must be chosen by the village. The village must choose. The midwife stood frozen as the weight of the spirit's words sank in. Auntie Molly's nails dug into her palms. You want us to choose someone to die? The spirit's golden eyes flared. Balance must be restored. Jaha shook his head violently. No, no. This was my burden. I will give myself. The spirit's head snapped toward him. You are the debtor, not the offering. Jaha felt like he was drowning. This was worse than death. The village would never forgive him. It would be his hands, his choices, that forced them to decide who would be sacrificed. Auntie Tosin's voice was hoarse. If we don't choose? The spirit turned toward the pit of forgotten offerings. The rotting, stolen placentas quivered. The ground shook. Then we will choose for you. Auntie Sefiu gritted her teeth. You mean you'll take more than one? The spirit only smiled. And that was answer enough. The gathering at the baobab. By dawn, the village of Kisiwa was gathered at the old baobab tree. The air was thick with tension and fear. The elders stood at the front, their weathered faces unreadable. Behind them, the mothers clutched their children, whispering prayers to gods who had long been silent. And in the center, Dr. Jaha stood, exposed, vulnerable, and forever ruined. Auntie Molly stepped forward, her voice ringing clear and unshaken. The spirits demand a life in exchange for the curse. Murmurs of horror rippled through the crowd. We do not have a choice, she continued. Either we choose, or the spirits will take who they please. A horrible silence followed. Then, a voice broke through. It was Kwame, the village blacksmith. His eyes burned with fury as he pointed a shaking finger at Jaha. It should be him. A roar of agreement followed. Jaha felt the ground tilt beneath him. Yes, someone shouted. He is the one who brought this upon us, another cried. But before the voices could rise into a riot, the spirit's laughter sliced through the air. He is not the one I require. The crowd went silent. And that was when the panic began. Whispers turned to shouts. Shouts turned to pleas. No one should have to die. There must be another way. Why should we suffer for his sins? And then, a single voice cut through the chaos. I will do it. The village turned. Gasps rippled through the crowd. It was Mama Naya, the woman who had given birth just days before. Her newborn was cradled against her chest, her face calm, but unbreakable. Jaha felt his stomach drop. No. No, not her. I will go, Naya repeated, stepping forward. Auntie Tosin grabbed her arm. Naya, no. It must be someone, Naya whispered. Let it be me. Jaha felt the world tilt. This was wrong. She had just given birth. She had done nothing. And yet, the spirit inclined its head. A willing offering. Its golden eyes flashed. The curse will be broken. Jaha couldn't breathe. Mama Naya turned to him and smiled. Perhaps this was always meant to happen, she said softly. Perhaps I was always meant to be the one to restore balance. Her child stirred in her arms, unaware of the fate unfolding around them. Jaha felt something break inside of him. And for the first time, he understood what true damnation felt like. Because he knew. For the rest of his days, he would live knowing that her life had paid for his mistakes. And that was the worst punishment of all. The curse is lifted, but the wound remains. The sky had darkened, though the sun had not yet set. The moment Mama Naya stepped forward, offering herself as the sacrifice, the very air in Kisiwa seemed to shift. The whispers of the spirit ceased, and the wind stilled, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Jaha's knees buckled. No, he whispered, his voice raw, shaking with horror. This isn't how it was supposed to be. Mama Naya, standing tall, turned to face him. There was no fear in her eyes. It must be someone, she said gently. And if not me, then who? Her words cut deeper than any knife. Jaha looked around wildly, searching for someone, anyone, to object. But the villagers stood silent, their faces tight with grief, guilt, and reluctant acceptance. Someone had to die. And they were too afraid to take her place. A decision that could not be reversed. The spirit shifted, its golden eyes gleaming like molten fire. You have chosen, it murmured. The debt will be paid. Mama Naya clutched her newborn tightly, pressing a gentle kiss to the child's forehead. Live well, my love, she whispered. Grow strong. Jaha couldn't take it anymore. He lurched forward. There must be another way. Auntie Molly, standing beside him, grabbed his arm, firm and unyielding. There is no other way, she murmured. Her voice was filled with sorrow, but also certainty. Jaha felt his throat tighten. Mama Naya turned back to the spirit and knelt. The villagers held their breath. The air turned dense and heavy, like the moment before a storm. The spirit extended a long, gnarled hand, its fingers stretched toward her heart. Jaha felt something snap inside of him. "No," he shouted. And before he could stop himself, he threw himself forward. The ultimate betrayal. He hadn't planned it. Hadn't thought. He just moved. Instinct. Guilt. Horror. A final act of defiance. He shoved Mama Naya aside just as the spirit's fingers closed around his chest instead. A bolt of agony shot through him. The world exploded in light and shadow. Jaha's scream tore through the village like a wounded animal. The spirit's rage. The villagers staggered back as the spirit recoiled, shrieking. It had not expected this. Had not chosen him. But Jaha had forced its hand. The curse had been hungry for blood, for a willing sacrifice. And now, it had claimed Jaha instead. His body convulsed, his veins darkening, twisting like roots beneath his skin. His mouth opened, but no sound came, only a deep, guttural moan of agony. The spirit howled, furious. This was not the agreement, it bellowed. But the villagers could only watch in horror as Jaha's form began to change. His skin cracked. His eyes darkened. His breath shuddered. And then, the spirit let go. Jaha collapsed. The earth rumbled. The pit of placenta stopped moving. The wind whispered one last time. And then, everything was still. The curse had been lifted. But Jaha was no longer the same man. A broken man, a broken village. The village of Kisiwa did not cheer. They did not celebrate. The price had been paid. But the wound would never heal. Mama Naya was alive. She had been spared. But Jaha was something else now. He staggered to his feet, his body weak, his skin pale. His hands, once the hands of a healer, now trembled like those of an old man. His back hunched slightly, as if a great weight had settled upon it. And his eyes were no longer the deep brown they had once been. They had turned gold. Like the spirits. The midwife stared in horror. Auntie Molly swallowed hard. She knew what had happened. Jaha had not died. But he had been changed. He was no longer just a man. He was something else now. Something that belonged to the spirits. Exile. The elders gathered the next morning. Jaha stood before them, hollow and exhausted, his golden eyes dull. He did not fight them when they spoke. Did not argue when Chief Bona declared, voice thick with regret. You cannot stay here. Jaha only nodded. He knew this would be the price. The spirits had taken his soul and left him with something not quite human. A healer who was now cursed. A man who had been willing to die, but was forced to live instead. The village of Kisiwa would never trust him again. And so, by midday, Jaha gathered his things. He turned to look at Kisiwa one last time. At the people he had once saved. At the home he would never return to. At the midwives who had uncovered his secret. And at Mama Naya, holding her newborn in her arms, the life he had saved. Their eyes met. She whispered one word. Why? Jaha offered no answer. And then, he walked into the wilderness. Alone. Never to be seen in Kisiwa again. Epilogue, the legend of the golden-eyed healer. Years passed. And the tale of Dr. Jaha became a whispered legend. They spoke of the doctor who had betrayed the spirits, who had stolen from them, who had paid the ultimate price. They said that on nights when the wind howled, you could still hear his voice, calling out in the dark, offering his healing hands to those in need. But no one ever answered. Because they knew. To accept help from the golden-eyed healer was to risk a fate far worse than death.